You're watching the YouTube version of the We Are Innovation podcast. Join us as we explore how innovation, new technologies, and human creativity improve our lives. The future is calling.
Hi, I'm Federico Fernández. Welcome to a new episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Today, we will talk about innovation in politics, more precisely about mobile voting. Given the expertise and bio of our guest, I'm sure other topics will come up, and I definitely want to know more about his philanthropic work. And our guest is Bradley Tusk. Bradley is the CEO and co-founder of Tusk Ventures, founder of the political consulting firm Tusk Strategist, and founder and CEO of Tusk's Philanthropist. He's also the author of The Fixer, My Adventures Saving Startups from Death by Politics, and he's also an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. Bradley recently opened a bookstore, podcast studio, event space, and cafe called P&T Network on Manhattan's Lower East Side. Online, you can find it on his personal website, bradleytusk.com. I'm going to leave the links on the description of the episode. Bradley, welcome to the We Are Innovation podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. It's great, and we know you're a busy guy, so really appreciate that you gave us some time to talk.
Yeah, no
problem.
To us. Happy to do it.
And jumping to our topic, I just want to ask you. I really like a philosopher who passed away in the last years of the 20th century, Karl Popper. And one of the things Popper did was saying that we should avoid so-called what is questions, but go more for which problems, are the things we are analyzing, trying to solve. That's more enriching. And I believe that's the case. And I also think that you are a problem solver in many ways. So
I try. I don't always succeed, but I give it a shot. Yeah.
so all of us, but yeah, definitely you are one of those. But so in that spirit, I wanted to ask you which problem or problems you are trying to solve with mobile voting.
Yeah. So specifically on mobile voting, and maybe I can give a little bit of background here just to catch the audience up. So the first part of my career was not in technology or venture capital. It was in politics directly. So I worked in city government in New York. I was Mike Bloomberg's campaign manager when he ran for mayor of New York, and I worked for him at City Hall. I worked in state government in Illinois. I was the deputy governor of the state of Illinois, which meant I ran the state's budget, operations, legislation, policy, and communications. I worked in the federal government in the U.S. Senate as the communications director for U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer. Chuck is now the majority leader of the U.S. Senate. And so I've seen government from lots of different angles: state, local, federal, executive branch, legislative branch. I have a law background, so I kind of understand the judicial branch. I've run campaigns. I feel like I've seen it from every conceivable angle. And my main takeaway from about 15 years of doing all that is, at least in the U.S., every policy output is the result of a political input. Every elected official makes every decision solely based on re-election and nothing else. And if we can just accept and understand this, as opposed to just wishing they were different or better people, you can then figure out, how can I get done whatever it is that I care about, right? And so in my view, whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish, whether it's for my portfolio companies at the venture fund or clients at the consulting firm or things out of my foundation, I've got to show the elected officials that we need that doing what I want either helps them win the next election, or not doing it will harm them from winning them, make it less likely they win the next election. So that's the premise that I work under for pretty much everything that I do. In the US, we've got a political system that is pretty screwed up, as I think the entire world is now quite aware of. And part of the reason why is we have this thing called gerrymandering, which means that in every state, the politicians in charge draw the legislative districts solely to benefit themselves. And as a result, every district is basically either a safe Democrat district or a safe Republican district. So there's no real competitive general elections. So the only election that actually matters in the US 95% of the time, basically other than the presidency, is the primary to pick the candidate for each party, the nominee. not the general election. And the problem is, in most primaries in the US, turnout is 10 to 15%. So if you go back to my point earlier that every policy output is a result of a political input, you're a member of Congress, you're a state senator, you're a mayor, whoever it is, all you want to do is get reelected. You know that a low number of people will vote in your next election, and you know who they are because it's a low number, and they tend to be the most ideological, the furthest left, the furthest right, the Sanders supporters, the AOC supporters, the Trump supporters, whoever it is. And those people don't want progress. They don't want compromise. They don't want, the two sides working together. They want moral purity at all costs. And as a result, because they're the only ones who matter, because they're the only ones that vote in primaries, they call the shots until we have a government at every level that is totally dysfunctional, totally polarized. Everyone hates each other and nothing gets done. And so really critical problems like climate change or guns or immigration or healthcare don't get dealt with simply because no one there is willing to sort of risk the political consequences of doing so. So, the assumption was always, well, people are just too apathetic. They don't care. There's nothing we can do about it. And then about a decade ago, I ran all the campaigns in the US to legalize Uber and ride sharing. And at the time when I started doing it, we were a tiny little company, right? We were a Series A company. We were only operating in one city, San Francisco. The taxi industry at the time was a very powerful, muscular industry with a lot of money and a lot of political clout. And they didn't want us in business, obviously, because they saw what would happen to them. And so they leaned on all of their politician friends to try to shut us down. And the way that we fought back, and we didn't know if it was going to work or not, but thank God it did, was we turned our customers into our political advocates, right? And we said to our customers, if you want to be able to continue having this service, we need you to weigh in, email, tweet, text, whatever it is. And through the app, they were able to do so. About 3 million people over the course of time in the US ended up doing that. And we won in every single market. And so what that said to me was, it's not that people are too apathetic to vote. It's that, when you make them go somewhere on a random Tuesday and they can't take their kid to school as a result, or they can be late for work, they're generally not going to do that. But if you make it really easy for them, they will. And so the only way to solve the dysfunction and polarization that we have in the US right now is by significantly increasing primary turnout so that the people who elected officials are worried about are more centrist and less sort of, ideologues and demagogues. The only way to increase turnout in the primaries, in my view, is by making voting available on your phones. And so I started something called the Mobile Voting Project, which is designed to make it possible in the US for people to vote in real elections on their phones. And so the problem I'm really trying to solve for is low primary turnout, which results in a dysfunctional government. That was a long answer. I hope that was okay.
What would you say to someone who tells you, but maybe we make the political process even worse if we invite people who wouldn't even go to vote, we have, let's say, even more irrational voters. What would you say to that?
I would say a few things to that. One is I just reject that premise. There are a lot of people in the US, typically very highly educated, wealthy people, who say to me effectively, well, we don't want stupid people to vote. First of all, the election of Donald Trump proved that lots of stupid people vote, right? So we're way past that point. Number two, I believe that ultimately, the more people who vote, the more the politicians are incentivized to meet the needs of the masses, right? And whatever the mainstream view is, it might not be my view on a particular issue. I might think that the mainstream view on something is stupid, but you know what? That's democracy. If it serves the highest number of people, that's what we should be doing. And so there is this very arrogant, condescending, patronizing argument by some people, typically sort of leftist elites, that we don't want stupid people to vote. But I think we want everyone to vote. And I think believing anything other than that is wildly undemocratic.
What can you tell us, that, let's say, examples that would make us think that mobile voting will actually increase the turnout?
So, since 2018, we have funded elections in 7 different states, 21 different jurisdictions, where I paid for the cost for that state or city, whatever it was, to administer the election to get them to do it, right? And it was offered to two groups of people: deployed military, so soldiers for the US who are abroad, and people with disabilities, typically the blind especially. Two groups that historically have a very hard time voting. And we made it available to these groups. Turnout on average more than doubled, so it showed that it works. I had every single one of them audited by the National Cybersecurity Center. They all came back clean. So clearly it works. However, a lot of people who don't want to change the system because they benefit from the way it is, they can't say, I don't want more people to vote. So what they can say is, well, it's not secure, it's not safe, Putin's going to hack it, we can't possibly let this happen, right? And I realized that until I could knock that argument down, I was never going to get anywhere, because the one thing to unite the two parties is when you take away their power. Then all of a sudden they have no problem working together, right? And so Republicans, Democrats, lobbyists, unions, business groups, they're all going to oppose this. So my view was, I have to build technology that is so superior to everything else out there that they just can't credibly make that case. And so I put $10 million of my own money into a program to build our own technology. We are about 3/4 of the way done with it. We're hoping to roll it out publicly this fall. And we're going to make it free and open source to anybody who wants to use it, build on top of it. The idea is, this is purely, can we show that this is at least as safe, if not safer, than the current methods of voting in the US? Because every method of voting has challenges. And if we can show, look, this is just as safe, then when the status quo says, oh, no, we can't do this, it's too risky, whatever it is, I need Generation Z. So my kids are 16 and 14. You know, remember the Arab Spring happened? I need the Arab Spring here in the US for mobile voting. And I need my kids and everyone in that sort of currently, call it 12 to 28 bracket, to just say, look, we do our banking online, we do our healthcare online, we do our love life online, and you can't tell me that we can't vote online. That's not because it's, you know, safe. You're trying to make it safer for me. You're trying to make it easier for you. And once they reject that, and we can build a movement, then hopefully we can legalize this in all 50 states. And then look, we'll see if I'm right, but all the early data indicates that we are.
Yeah, and as you probably know, on February the 27th, if I remember correctly, in Estonia, the parliamentary election took place, and 51% of the voters did it online.
Yep.
Putin didn't hack it. And
Nope. I'm a huge fan of Estonia, because they have been the most impressive in the world by a lot in terms of generally mobile voting, citizen identification over the blockchain, and just making government services available to regular people and making it as easy as possible. The Estonian government has done incredible work. We've had conversations with them because we're big admirers of theirs. If nothing else, they like it when I praise them publicly for it. So yeah, I mean, that's clearly, you know, there are countries that are already doing it. Look, the UK, when they had their primary to pick the prime minister within the Conservative Party, they used electronic voting, it worked. So there are definitely examples where this is already happening. It's just a question of, at least in the US, politicians who have power don't like giving up power, and they do whatever they can to stay in office, whether it's corrupt or not. And we're going to have to overcome all of that corruption and all of that selfishness to try to make the system better.
You mentioned before military people and also handicapped, particularly visually impaired. But I believe there are other groups also who could benefit from mobile voting, correct?
Sure. So look, senior citizens for whom it's hard, they're not very mobile. Younger voters who are just, you know, they're on the internet all day, and they would be far more likely to do it. A lot of communities of color in the US, especially in the South, we have a lot of voter suppression, where the election officials actually try to deter Black people from voting. You can't deter someone from voting if they're pressing a button on their phone. You don't know what color their finger is, right? So people of color, people on Native American reservations. So there's lots of different groups. Now, look, ultimately, the point is we should all be able to vote online because it's the most secure way to vote and it's the most accessible way to vote. But you're right. What I think we're going to have to do is start with groups that are hard to object to and kind of keep working our way back into the center.
And how could you describe, how would this, you are building the technology, and I'm not asking for, let's say, technical details, which I probably won't understand anyway, but how would it work? How is the experience of the mobile voter?
So it's an end-to-end, fully encrypted system. When you go on the website or the app, it's pretty simple, right? Because we vote in online polls and other stuff, who's the best singer on TV or whatever it is. All the voter has to do is identify themselves. The US voter ID is complicated because every single jurisdiction has their own rules around it. So our view is whatever the rules are, we'll meet them, right? If it's very stringent, fine. If it's very loose, fine. That's not our issue. Whatever has to be done to identify the voter, we will do. Biometrics, iris, fingerprint, whatever. And then it's pretty simple. The ballot pops up and you're just picking, I want Joe Biden or I want Donald Trump or whoever it is. It then gets submitted. A PDF is sent back to you so that you can see the choices you made and confirm them. And then once it's sent in, it's in through the cloud, encrypted, sent to the election official and office of whoever's conducting the election. They then have the results immediately. And they can print out paper copies of all the ballots too. So if they want to audit it or anything else, it's all available to them. So what we've tried to do is build something that from the minute the voter touches it to the minute the vote is counted, it's completely encrypted, it's completely secure, and would be extremely hard to hack.
You started, and sorry if I misheard, you started in 2018 more or less with and since you started in 2018, have you found like a counter argument or a reason that made you doubt, like say, maybe this is not secure enough, or maybe I don't know that?
I mean, look, there are definitely people who have made strong arguments that this is just can't possibly be secure enough, and that there will be some way to penetrate it. And I understand that. And look, I'm not blind to the fact that we did have an election in 2016 where Putin and the Russians were trying to interfere through different forms of digital interference. So I get that. That's why I spent so much money and so much time building a new system, because my thought was the government's never going to invest in this because they don't want to make it easier, right? They don't want to change the way they have power. And there are election businesses in the US, but they just want to sell whatever product it is that the government is asking for, right? So they're never going to do the R&D to figure this out. So the only person that left was me, right? So I was like, all right, big shot, you want to solve this problem, put your money where your mouth is. And that's what I tried to do. But look, one of the reasons that I'm going to release the code open source is so that people can help me improve it, right? I don't have all the answers. We're right now in the phase where we've built it and we're just testing it, in every conceivable way. I've got all of these different firms trying to penetrate it, hack it, everything else. So when we put it out there, it will be the best that we could possibly do. But technology evolves all the time. My day job is as a venture capitalist. I know this from my actual work. And that's why I want people to keep able to build on it and make it better.
How do you envision the adoption curve of mobile voting in the US? Do you think first like city elections and then from there, or?
Exactly right. So I think that, interestingly, people sort of assume that what's really important are the federal elections and the general elections, not the primary. In reality, the vast majority of governance in the US happens at the municipal and the state level, and those elections are all decided in the primary, not the general election. So if we're starting off in city and state elections and just primaries, that's fine with me. And look, we just did some polling and found that Democrats and independents are more supportive of mobile voting than Republicans, because Republicans have often bought into Trump's theories of election fraud and vote stealing and all of that. So they're more skeptical. So if you say to me, look, you can start in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, whatever it is, fine, great. Because my view is, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. The reason why we won for Uber is once people experience how much better that was than trying to wait in the street and hope that some taxi would stop to pick you up. They didn't want to let go of it, right? And adoption skyrocketed. So I think the same thing will be the case here too. If I can just get the chance to put it out there in the world, it'll grow quickly.
You mentioned Uber a couple of times, and let's say I want to go to that period of your life and to also your book, The Fixer. And let's say I would like to ask you if the following questions regarding, the continue with the issue of problem solving, but to relate it to different areas of your thought and your work. And what I want to start is that many startups don't have neither the shoulders nor the political expertise to weather the political and the regulatory storms that they face sometimes. And because of these, many companies, and particularly startups, die, or better said, they are aborted before they are even born. And in that regard, Tusk strategies, what you do with Tusk strategies, what you do with Tusk ventures, with your new venture, the Pericles Group, is trying to solve that. Is exactly going to that problem, correct?
Yeah. So look, the story is kind of always the same, which is an entrepreneur has either a totally new idea or a better way of doing something. They're pretty much ignored, but they generate a little bit of, they get some funding, they launch, and then over time, customers start adopting it because they're like, oh, this is a better way to do, whatever it is, get a taxi, get a hotel room, place a bet, whatever you want. And then as they start to succeed, they start taking market share away from the incumbents. The incumbents then say, oh no, now they can't compete in terms of quality or product or technology, so they have to resort to corrupt politics, right? And they go to their friends who they give money to and say, look, just ban this thing. Say that Airbnb can't exist, Uber can't exist, whatever it is. And politicians, because their only goal is to get reelected, will do what they need to do to keep raising money. And the only way you're going to stop that is if you present the counter argument to them that, like, yes, the hotel industry may be giving you $100,000 in campaign contributions, but I can get 100,000 voters in your state to tell you that they want to keep Airbnb. And then politically, that's a lot more valuable than the $100,000, right? So we've got to always show regulators and elected officials that their ultimate political interest lies in supporting technology, supporting consumers, allowing innovation to flourish, rather than just allowing corrupt, entrenched interests to stop innovation. And so that's kind of our day job, and we do it in city governments, in state governments, in the federal government. And it's not to say that there shouldn't be regulation of technology, but the regulation should be, what is the best way for this technology to exist in the world and help people, not should it or shouldn't exist because it's good or not for the people who are already in that industry.
Yeah, we always like to say that, let's say, if we were making a cocktail, it should be 9 parts of innovation and 1 part of regulation, not the other way around would be like a Molotov cocktail.
Correct. That's a great way to say it. Yeah, totally.
And I want to quote, your own book to yourself, and then ask you about it. I want to go to The Fixer, where you really narrate in a lovely way how the so-called Travis's law came to being. And I want to read you just how you define Travis's law, and then ask you something. And I'll start quoting. Travis's law, as it became known, says that in any jurisdiction with the rule of law, meaning where elected officials are democratically chosen by the people, Uber is better off entering the market with or without permission, demonstrating the product to the public and building a customer base. When regulators then, at the behest of the taxi industry, try to shut down Uber, they turn their riders into advocates and use grassroots political pressure to ensure Uber's continued existence. And this is the process you were describing a few minutes ago, but well, here, let's say, codified in law. But my question, related to this is, what are the do's and don'ts of what we could call evasive entrepreneurship? When should startups and companies, try to choose to beg for forgiveness rather than ask for permission, as you put it on the book?
It's a great question. There's actually a whole section of the book devoted specifically to how do you think through that question. And the answer I'm going to give you is going to be a little frustrating because there's not one clear answer. It really depends on the industry, the laws on the books, the jurisdiction you're trying to do it in, and the power of your opposition, right? So for example, with Uber, the worst case scenario was they impounded a car, right? No one wants to lose a car, but it's just a car, right? If you are a cryptocurrency company and you are taking deposits that violate securities laws, the penalty might be 7 years in jail. Bankman-Fried's going to go to jail for decades. And so part of it is, what risk are you facing, right? If it's jail time, that's a very different thought process than if it's just an economic cost. So that's number one. Number two is, if you're able to enter the market without permission, can you build up enough of a customer base and enough loyalty quickly enough that you could then mobilize those people politically on your behalf, right? And if you can do that, which is what we did with Uber, with FanDuel, with Ease, with Bird, a whole bunch of companies, then you have a political force to fight back with, right? If you launch and people don't really care, it's going to be a lot harder to protect yourself, right? So partly it's being honest about how will people respond to my product, right? So that's part of it. Part of it is how powerful the people I'm taking on, right? Taxi industry was powerful, but they were disorganized, they were unsophisticated, they were sleazy. There was a lot of public resentment against them already. We were able to leverage that resentment. There are other industries that have their act together much more so, and taking them on is going to be a lot harder, right? So it's a variety of factors to try to determine it, but ultimately it's, if you can launch without going to jail and you can build a political coalition quickly because you launched to use on your behalf to fight back, then you should do so.
I am a faithful listener of your podcast, Firewall. Which
thank you.
We'll put a link also on the description to it as well. And I recommend everyone who's listening to this to go and subscribe to your podcast. And well, I mean, let's say there are episodes in which you basically talk to one of your colleagues, and some that you interviewed people. Both are very interesting. But one of the episodes that you recently launched really caught my attention, and it's the interview you did with Catherine Dockery, if I remember correctly, was her name, and let's say the kind of ventures if she's in. I wanted to ask you for this because first one question to clarify. You said that you personally have invested with her.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm an investor. So Catherine is an incredible entrepreneur, and she built a fund called Vice Ventures. And what they do is they only invest in bad things: sex tech, cigarette, tobacco, drugs, alcohol, gambling, but things that are also, as a result, heavily regulated. And my view is, just in the same way that my venture capital fund, one reason we've done well is we lean into regulation. So the thing that drives most VCs away is the thing that actually attracts us. If you can do that well, you can have really huge returns, which we do, because you're the only one in the space, right? So you have a monopoly, right? Most people are terrified to do what she does. So my view was, the right person, which is her, with the right mentality, could be wildly successful because she has the guts to do things that most people don't. Now, look, a lot of the companies she's investing in are things that actually end up being like, nicotine cessation, or, they're not all sort of literally bad things, but she's been incredibly successful at it. I'm an advisor to her fund. I'm an investor in her fund. We trade deal flow all the time. She comes on the podcast. She always comes and speaks to my class at Columbia. So yeah, she's one of my best and closest partners.
Yeah, and I wanted, my question had to do with that you just mentioned, regarding alternatives to smoking, in the sense that, for instance, this year, Sweden is most likely reaching smoke-free status. And it's in great part due to an amazing Swedish innovation that is already old now, which is called snus and other, alternatives. And I wanted to see, let's say, I wanted to know your opinion regarding that issue. Do you see that there's something there that innovative products regarding nicotine could help us defeat? I am not prohibitionist, but let's say I'm not going to give cigarettes to my children.
Right. So I think there's just, so we know that cigarettes are bad, right? Everyone understands that. They're also addictive, and there's a big industry behind it. So the question is, can you manage to shift people who smoke cigarettes into other things that are either less harmful or not harmful at all? So vaping, for example, had Juul not had a business model focused on kids, and it was just about how do we get cigarette smokers to vape instead, that would have been a real improvement, right? Because a lot of the tar and a lot of the other chemicals that are in cigarettes are not in vapes, and that would be an improvement. Now, the way that Juul went about their business model was terrible, and as a result, they got in a lot of trouble. But now you're at smokeless tobacco and other products that are even less harmful than vaping, right? And they don't cause cancer, and they don't necessarily cause nicotine addiction and things like that. So, snus is a good example of that. And so, I think the product innovation has the chance to really help a lot of people and save a lot of lives. In a perfect world, none of us would ever want or need drugs, alcohol, nicotine, anything else. But you know what? We're human beings, right? We're highly fallible. We've got a weird mix of genes, and some are good and some are bad. And you can't tell people, I don't think you should gamble, or I don't think you should smoke, or I don't think you should smoke, marijuana or whatever it is, or watch pornography, and therefore you can't do it, right? Because you know what? Throughout history, when you tell people they can't do something like that, they do it anyway, right? So you just have giant black markets, whether it's now on narcotics, or in the US, we tried prohibition to ban alcohol. That didn't work. There's been illegal gambling since the beginning of time. So my view on all these industries is, look, if it's going to happen one way or the other, let's do it right. Let's regulate it. Let's tax it. Let's put consumer protections into it. And let's try to do it in the most responsible way we can, rather than pretending that it doesn't exist and seeing tremendous numbers of people face harm.
We all know there was a small issue with a bank in Silicon Valley. In any case, and sorry, I have to tell you this now that we are face to face.
Yeah.
I listened to your podcast, and you did an episode before the collapse and after the collapse, and more or less that the deposits were saved. And you at one point described the whole thing, and you said that it lasted 4 days. Let me tell you, I come originally from Argentina, Bradley. That is not a bank run or a bank collapse in my book at all. That's amateur. That's total amateur.
Right. I get it. Look, what was specifically noteworthy to me about the SVB situation, other than terrifying because we had a lot of money, like every venture capitalist, including us, we all had money because in our accounts there, and our portfolio companies did too. And at least for a little while, we didn't know if all that money was just disappeared, which would have been devastating to our portfolio companies. We would have survived, but it would have really hurt our performance and everything else. Now, over the course of that weekend, because I'm in politics, I had a sense of what the internal regulatory discussions were, and it became clear to me that it was going to be okay. But putting aside sort of the moment of terror that we faced personally, like every startup and every VC, what's interesting here is it's the first bank panic in the US in the age of social media. And like everything that social media touches, things spiral out of control very, very quickly, right? So did Silicon Valley Bank make some mistakes? Absolutely. But did people overreact? Yes. But the problem is, once prominent venture capitalists started overreacting on Twitter, the only logical thing to do is to follow suit and try to pull your money. Because, my partner Jordan and I, when we tried to pull our money from Silicon Valley Bank, we knew it wasn't really the right thing to do. We knew that we were just contributing to a panic. But what are we going to tell our investors? Sorry, we didn't try to get your money out, right? And so And so we did, like everyone else, but the misinformation and the spread of it on social media was so rapid that I think part of, as the government now looks back at what happened, said, what regulations do we need to change? One thing that I've been advocating for, you've probably heard me talk about this on the podcast, is a very simple requirement that just says, social media platforms, here's a list of 500 financial institutions, whatever the number should be. When traffic spikes beyond a certain point, 10%, 15%, whatever it is, call the federal regulators. Just let them know, hey guys, we don't know why this is happening, but it's happening. You might want to take a look. And that might allow us to get ahead of some of these problems. It wouldn't cost anybody anything. It's just sharing information. And Congressman Richie Torres, who's a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, this week introduced legislation that would require that specifically. In fact, he'll be a guest coming up on Firewall soon to talk about it. And so my hope is that we can get this rule adopted, because we can come up with all the banking regulations we want. If we don't acknowledge the fact that we just live in a different world where information travels in a vastly different way at a vastly different speed, we're not going to solve the problem.
Just to be clear, what you are advocating for is basically just that authorities, bank regulators are informed. It's not restraining any kind of communication or anything like that.
Not at all. It wouldn't cost anything. I mean, maybe each platform would have to hire one person to do this, but we're very, very minimal. It's just that the platforms have so much data that the government's never going to have, that if you or I worked for the Federal Reserve and our job was keep an eye on all the platforms, we would see the information much later than the people inside of Twitter or Discord or Facebook or whatever it is. So it's just saying, hey, people at this platform, please just let the right people know. That's all it is.
Yeah, and I promised at the beginning, and I'm really looking forward to know more. You are doing certain philanthropic activities. One of them we discussed in detail, which is it's related to mobile voting. Yeah. But the second one, which is, I mean, from a humanitarian point of view, is probably more important, for the people affected, is to end hunger in the U.S. Can you tell us a little bit what you're doing about?
Yeah, sure. So I've always been interested in this issue. For the last 30 years, I've worked weekly to Soup Kitchen. In fact, I came to this podcast from the Soup Kitchen this morning. I do it every Thursday. And I've always cared about hunger as an issue, because it seems to me there's a lot in life that is unsure and complicated. People eating is better than people not eating. To me, that's very clear. It's very tangible. And if I can help more people who need food eat, that's just good. And so I worked on these issues kind of on an individual basis at soup kitchens and things like that. And then when I started my first company, which was back in 2010, I started making money. I started writing checks to hunger organizations. And the way it works, at least in the US, is when you give a charity a lot of money, they pay a lot of attention to you because they want you to give them even more money, right? And so I started spending time with the Food Bank for New York and looking at their political operation and realizing these are very nice people. They're trying to help, but they are terrible at politics, in part because politics is a rough business, right? And so my question was, what if we treated these hunger campaigns in states to say, you have to pay to feed, the government has to feed every kid breakfast and lunch every day, or make sure the senior citizens who are hungry have access to food stamps or whatever it is. What if you ran them like real political campaigns, right? The way that I run the things for my portfolio companies, for my clients, what if that level of sophistication or expertise was applied to a hunger campaign? And so what we did, we said, okay, we're going to run these campaigns ourselves. We're going to take it away from these hunger groups. We'll give them some money just to kind of stay out of the way. And then I'm going to pay for all the things that you need in a typical campaign: lobbying, public relations, polling, grassroots, opposition research, advertising, all of that. And it's, if we do all of that, can we take bills that weren't passing and get them to pass? And the answer has been a resounding yes. Since about 2017, we've passed bills in 19 different states, 20 bills total. About 12 million more people now have access to food that didn't have it before. And most interestingly, about a $5 million spend by me total has unlocked about $1.5 billion per year in new government spending on hunger programs. And so I think we found that one issue where it wasn't succeeding, but it also wasn't that controversial. And with the right expertise and resources, you could make a lot of change very quickly. And that's what we've done. We have now helped create universal school meals, which in the US is where the government is required to make sure that every kid gets a free breakfast and a free lunch at school so they don't go hungry, because we have 20, even though this is the richest country in the world, 20% of our people still don't have enough food, right? And that's crazy because we have so much wealth in this country, right? And I think about all the food that just my family wastes every week, let alone everyone else, right? So we are running campaigns now all over the country to mandate universal school meals. We're in the middle of big budget fights in New York, Connecticut, North Carolina, Vermont, Oklahoma. And the city, our thesis seems to be right. It's working. And I'm going to just keep pushing as hard as I can. And look, to be clear, we are taking what was a very soft, quiet advocacy area and making it very hard and very political and tough. And not everyone likes that, right? There's a lot of people that feel like, oh, you're being too rough. You have to be nice to everyone, otherwise they're going to be mad at you. And if you go back to the very beginning of this podcast, if every policy output is a result of a political input, it doesn't matter how nice or not nice I am to a politician. What matters is either they think that doing what I want will help them win re-election, or not doing what I want will make it less likely they win re-election. And if they believe that, they'll fund school meals. And if they don't believe that, they won't. And it's as simple as that. But doing that sometimes requires being tough. For example, I've got mobile billboard trucks. Albany is the state capital of New York. As we speak right now, going around and saying, Governor Hochul, she's the governor of New York, how could you let hungry kids starve? That made people very upset when we launched these trucks this week. You're too rough. They're angry. They're going to be mad at us. And my answer is like, who cares? Like, I don't care what they think of me personally. I don't care what they think of your organization. I just care about getting more food for kids. And if my being rough on them is going to result in more funding for school meals, I'm going to be rough on them, right? And so, it's the human psychology of it is interesting. But my hope would be that, especially if I can attract some partners, both on voting and hunger, I've paid for every single thing out of my pocket. And I've done well, but I'm not so rich that I'm not Mike Bloomberg where I could just put endless amounts of money into things. Hopefully I can convince some other people too to partner with me. And I think that if we had enough resources in the next 5 years, we can ensure that every single state in this country offers universal school meals, and every single kid in this country, at the very least, is getting a free breakfast and a free lunch every single day.
Two quick follow-up questions because we're running out of time, but just I totally understand. I mean, and let's say the logic is obvious, that leveraging 4 million into 1.5 billion, let's say it's a good return, definitely. And just let's say as a thought experiment, or in a, let's say if we would live in an ideal world, the only thing, let's say, that sometimes I would worry about is the following: who do you think would be wiser and would spend that 1 billion better? The government and public officials, or a counterparty of Tusk's philanthropists? If they could have that money.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something I think about a lot, right? So I would say I've run governments, right? I ran the state of Illinois, big state. And what I learned is there are things that government does very well, and there are things that government does very poorly. And rather than, the Republicans say it's all bad, the Democrats say it's all good, neither of those things are true. And by the way, I'm an independent. I'm not in either party. My view is always, let's increase funding for the things that work, and the things that don't work, let's find a better way to do it. School meals happens to be something that works really well, right? It's very efficient. The spend is very cost effective. That makes sense. But there are other things the government does that they're not good at all. For example, in the US, the lottery business is controlled by each state, and they're a disaster because state governments don't know how to run a gambling business. They don't know how to run a consumer products business. And as a result, they've created this thing that is both bad from a public policy perspective and not that profitable for the state itself. So there are things that government is needed to do. There are things that government shouldn't do. I don't know how much attention this concept has gotten, around the rest of the world, but there has been this discussion in the US, what's called universal basic income. And what that means, it was originally started by Martin Luther King. Andrew Yang, when he ran for president, really popularized the concept, wrote a great book about it called The War on Normal People. And it would basically be a direct wealth transfer from someone like me to someone who needs it. But rather than my dollar going from me to the government, 50 cents getting wasted, stolen, corrupted, everything else, and then 50 cents going to the person who needs it, the whole dollar goes right to them. I strongly support that. In fact, I backed Andrew Yang when he ran for mayor of New York City. We didn't win, but I supported him very aggressively because I felt like universal basic income is such a better approach to things, because there are, when it comes to basic decisions of people's finances in their lives, giving them the money and letting them make the choices directly is going to end up being far more effective and do far more good than watering it down through an entire government process.
Are you part of the effective altruism movement?
Yes and no. I believe in it in the sense that the first part of my career, I was in government and public service. Then, I went to technology. I've been lucky to make a lot of money. And I've been using that money, as we've been discussing, to try to impact change on things like democracy and hunger. And so the idea of sometimes the highest and best use of someone is not to necessarily spend their life, at a monastery, but it's to make money and then give that money to causes that can be effective. That's the basic principle of effective altruism. That makes sense to me because I've seen it in my own life, right? So from that standpoint, yes. All the principles of it, no, because my big kind of problem with effective altruism is it's a lot of people who are very smart, a guy named Will McCaskill from Oxford started it and all that. But none of them understand politics. None of them understand government. They all think that they do. And so they're making big societal choices without understanding one of the major stakeholders in the game, right? And so I wrote a column for Fast Company magazine, and a piece that I wrote a few months ago basically said, what we're doing on hunger is the most effective form of effective altruism, because I'm leveraging my private dollars into government spending on a program, hunger, that it actually does very well. And so we're at a 300x ROI for our program. That's about as good as the return as you're going to get. And by the way, it's not mutually exclusive to make money and spend your time helping people. Like I said, I was at the soup kitchen this morning. I'm talking to you now. I'll probably spend the rest of the day working on investments, and trying to make money. So these things can all go together. We live in this world now, and I think social media is a lot to blame for this, where everything is black and white. You're good, you're evil. You're this or you're that. And that's not how humans work, right? You can do different things for different reasons in different ways, and some are more effective than others. But the fun thing about being a human being is trying out different ideas and seeing what works.
Thank you, Bradley. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we have an opportunity in the future to continue.
I would love to. That'd be great.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And to everyone who listened to this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And we'll meet again in another episode of the We Are Innovation podcast.
Thanks for watching this episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To know more about We Are Innovation, visit weareinnovation.global.